A prophecy that lay dormant for decades is now about to awaken. One of the darkest visions ever spoken about Donald Trump appears to be on the verge of coming true. And the most unsettling thing is who saw it coming. Jeane Dixon. A woman who not only predicted Kennedy's assassination, but also the death of Marilyn Monroe and an attack against the Pope, long before the world even suspected that something like that could happen. For years, her words were hidden, silenced, labeled as uncomfortable. But today her warning about Trump resurfaces, and what it describes is not only power or downfall, it is something deeper, more sinister, something that could change everything. Dixon was not simply a fortune-teller throwing out vague phrases to impress the curious. She was a figure who walked between light and shadow. Born in 1904, she claimed that her gift came directly from God. From a very young age, her visions appeared with a force that even she herself could not ignore. But what made her different was her courage. She did not hide. She spoke with names, with dates, with details that time would eventually confirm. In 1956, while the world continued on its course without suspecting what was coming, Dixon predicted the death of an American president, a young Democrat who would rise to power and die violently while in office. 7 years later, the gunshot in Dallas shook the planet. The prophecy had been fulfilled with an accuracy that chilled everyone's blood. From then on, no one laughed at her words again. Her gift did not stop there. She also warned of the death of Marilyn Monroe, the rise of communism in China, and an assassination attempt against Pope Paul VI in 1965. All of this before it happened. Her fame grew, but so did the fear. Some revered her as a divine instrument, others feared her, convinced that her connection came from something darker. She was deeply Catholic and said that her visions came to her while she prayed. That fusion between faith and prophecy made her messages resonate even more strongly among believers. She was seen as a messenger, a living warning that the divine and the unknown could cross paths at any moment. For decades she walked the edge between holiness and mystery, between hope and threat. Every fulfilled prediction strengthened her reputation. They were not coincidences, they were signs, and each of them seemed to announce something greater, more transcendental, that was still yet to be revealed. And now that something points to our time and to a man named Donald Trump. What Jeane Dixon wrote about him remained hidden because many were not prepared to hear it. But her final warning could be the most disturbing of all. Before continuing with this story, one that will make you question destiny, power, and faith, I invite you to support this message. Click the like button, subscribe to Spiritual Awakening, and share this video with those who seek to understand what others prefer to ignore. Stay until the end because what you are about to discover could change the way you see the future. Jeane Dixon did not limit herself to reading palms or studying the stars. She was consulted by some of the most powerful people in the world. Presidents, first ladies, foreign leaders, and political advisors who normally dismissed anything that escaped reason or strategy. But when it came to Dixon, even the most rational minds listened to her. One of her earliest connections with political power emerged with President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Although it was not widely publicized, it is said that his team paid attention to certain predictions by Dixon, especially during moments of national uncertainty. But it was during the presidency of Richard Nixon that her influence became much more visible. Dixon and Nixon shared a strange connection behind the scenes. Nixon, deeply superstitious and guided by emotion, is believed to have turned to her warnings more than once, although he never admitted it publicly. Some claimed that her predictions were reviewed during key political decisions. Dixon also warned that Nixon would face serious challenges during his term. A warning that many later associated with the Watergate scandal, which ended with his resignation. Her reach, however, extended far beyond the United States. Foreign diplomats, ambassadors, and even members of royalty discreetly sought her advice. Rumors circulated that leaders in the Middle East consulted her on matters of oil and political conflicts. She was not a government official, she had no access to classified information, but her words traveled through the corridors of power like whispers from another world. Even years later, First Lady Nancy Reagan, during her husband's presidency, followed similar steps, turning to astrologers and psychics, a practice that Dixon had made more visible and less taboo. Jeane Dixon was not an outsider looking in from the outside, she was inside. Her voice quietly echoing in the places where the fate of nations was decided. As time passed, it became clear that Jeane Dixon's influence went beyond the occasional. Her connection with American political power seemed almost predestined. Again and again she appeared at the edge of major national moments, offering warnings, insights, and enigmatic messages that resonated beyond the world of psychics and predictions. She did not only speak about politicians, she seemed drawn to them, and curiously, many of them also felt drawn to her. One of the most fascinating aspects of her life was how frequently her visions coincided with turning points in American politics. It was not that she predicted everything correctly, no prophet does. But her most powerful visions seemed to arrive precisely when the country stood at a crossroads. And those moments were not minor ones, they were historic events that shaped the direction of the nation. Dixon was often present in Washington, D.C., living near the center of power, just a few blocks from the Capitol. She moved in elite circles. Her name was known among influential wives, senators, and advisors. She even received letters and invitations from people inside the White House. Some sought private advice, others simply wanted to hear her latest predictions, even if only out of curiosity. But after Kennedy's death, that curiosity turned into caution. Her words could no longer be dismissed so easily. At times it seemed that Dixon's visions surrounded the very heart of American power, warning of dangers, revealing hidden truths, or hinting at outcomes still unthinkable. She once said that the United States would face a great spiritual battle and that the future of the country would depend not only on political decisions, but on a deeper moral struggle taking place behind the scenes. For many, this was not simple mysticism, but prophecy directly linked to power. And that made even the most skeptical politicians pay attention. Jeane Dixon never claimed that her visions shone suddenly, without warning, like flashes of light or powerful dreams impossible to ignore. When she focused on the future of America, the images she received were dark, emotional, and charged with warning. She saw a divided nation, not only politically, but spiritually. Her visions revealed a future in which people would turn against one another, where truth would mix with lies, and where the foundations of the country would tremble. These were not simple guesses. She described scenes that were almost biblical, cities filled with unrest, leaders caught in scandals, and a growing fear among ordinary people. Dixon spoke many times about a great trial that would fall upon the United States. She did not give exact dates, but the tone of her warnings was urgent. She said that the country would face confusion, corruption, and a leadership crisis. Some called these predictions vague, but as time passed, as social tensions increased, more people began to see her words as disturbing reflections of what was happening. In one of her most discussed visions, Dixon saw a powerful figure rise to lead the nation. A man who would capture the hearts of many, but would also awaken anger and division like never before. She did not name him, but described him as bold, charismatic, and controversial. He would be praised by some as a savior and hated by others as a threat. Dixon warned that under his leadership, the country would enter a time of spiritual testing. For those who believed in her gift, these visions were not merely predictions, they were messages, warnings intended to prepare the nation before it was too late. It did not appear in a headline, nor was it proclaimed publicly. But when Jeane Dixon first mentioned the vision of a man who would one day rise to lead America and divide it deeply, those who heard her words remembered them because they carried a strange weight. There was something in her voice, in the way she described him, that sounded different, almost like a warning wrapped in mystery. She did not use the word president. At first she referred to this person as a leader of great influence, someone who would attract crowds, challenge the traditional system, and provoke emotional waves throughout the country. She said that he would rise suddenly, as if appearing out of nowhere, and that people would either love him deeply or hate him completely. There would be no middle ground. She described him as a man who was admired and feared, with great charisma, courage, and confidence. He would speak in a direct, simple, unpolished manner, connecting with ordinary people, but she warned that beneath the surface he would bring great disruption. Institutions would tremble, alliances would break, and the moral compass of the country would be put to the test. She said he would be a man who would carry the flag proudly, but behind that flag there would be conflict, not only political but spiritual. She did not say that he was evil, but she did say that his arrival would mark the beginning of a spiritual struggle in the soul of America between truth and deception, between unity and division. For decades this prophecy was archived, almost forgotten, but as the country became more divided, people began to remember it. Who was the man she saw? Was he already among us, or had he already come? Some believe the answer is clear, others are still waiting. Jeane Dixon was known for speaking in symbols, metaphors, and visions that seemed more like sacred scripture than news headlines. But when it came to this mysterious man, the one she said would change the course of America, her words became unusually direct, almost chilling in their precision. She described him as a man with a face of charm, but a heart of conflict. She said that he would appear strong and courageous, but that inside him a fire would burn too intensely. In one of her visions, she saw him standing before great crowds, with people cheering and waving flags. But in that same vision she also saw shadows behind him, disorder, confusion, and a storm that would not pass. Dixon wrote, "He will rise not through tradition, but through disruption. The people will choose him not because of his past, but because of his promise to break the system." She also warned, "He will speak like no leader before him. His words will cut like a sword, stirring the soul of the nation, for better or for worse." She did not give him a name, but she did give details. He would come from wealth, walk among the powerful, but speak like the common man. He would be loved intensely and hated with the same force, and his time would mark a turning point in the battle for the spirit of America. Some who read those words in her books or later interviews dismissed them as poetic exaggeration. But decades later, when a leader who fit that profile emerged, her descriptions began to feel less like prophecy and more like a mirror held up to reality. Whether coincidence or divine vision, Dixon's words continue to resonate not only as the description of a man, but as the portrait of a historic moment that may still be unfolding. For decades, Jeane Dixon's prophecy about a powerful and divisive figure seemed like just one more among her long list of visions, but when Donald Trump burst onto the political scene, many began to look back with new eyes. Suddenly, the details that once seemed symbolic became concrete, too precise to ignore. She had spoken of a man who would rise not through the traditional paths of politics, but through disruption. Trump, a businessman with no previous experience in public office, entered the 2016 race as a complete outsider in the political world. His campaign was based on challenging the established system, breaking norms, and speaking directly to forgotten Americans. Dixon's prediction described exactly that kind of rise. She had said that the man would come from wealth, and Trump's background in real estate business and the media fit perfectly. Dixon warned that he would be admired by many and attacked by just as many others, and that also came true. Trump became one of the most polarizing figures in modern political history, celebrated by millions and condemned by millions more. But the most striking thing was her description of a leader who would cause a great upheaval, not only in politics, but in the spirit of the nation. During Trump's presidency, the United States experienced unprecedented political division, massive protests, intense media battles, and deep cultural fractures. His supporters saw him as a necessary force for change, his critics as a threat to democracy. Many now believe that Dixon's prophecy was never vague, but rather a vision of a future that only made full sense when Donald Trump stepped onto the political stage. Her once mysterious words now seemed like a script unfolding in real time. For those who had followed her visions for years, this was the moment they had been waiting for, and it was not over yet. Despite the unsettling accuracy of Jeane Dixon's words, her prophecy about a powerful and divisive leader remained buried in obscurity for decades. It was not because the vision lacked weight, but quite the opposite. Probably because the details were too disturbing, too disruptive to be taken seriously in her time. In the years following her most famous predictions, Dixon was both revered and ridiculed. The media portrayed her as a sensationalist figure, and skeptics used her occasional inaccuracies to discredit the larger picture. Over time, her voice, once respected in political and religious circles, began to fade. People moved on, dismissing her words as relics of a strange past. Another factor was that her prophecy did not point to any known political figure at the time. The man she described did not yet exist, at least not in the public eye, without a face to give shape to the words. Many considered the prediction too vague or implausible. It lacked context, and for that reason it was set aside. But perhaps the most important reason her warning was ignored lies in human nature itself. People often turn away from messages that bring discomfort. Dixon did not speak of peace or healing in this vision. She spoke of division, of spiritual conflict, of a storm approaching the soul of the nation. It was not the kind of message people want to hear. It raised too many questions, shook the foundations of comfort. Only when Donald Trump rose to power with all the traits Dixon had mentioned decades earlier did the old writings resurface. Researchers, believers, and curious people began to connect the dots. The vision had been there all along. The warning had been clear, but no one wanted to believe it until it was already happening. As history unfolded, many understood that Jeane Dixon's vision was not only about one man, but about a moment, about a spiritual turning point, about a nation in conflict with itself. And when comparing the events of the last decade with her prophecy, the similarities were astonishing. Dixon had spoken of a leader who would cause profound emotional division in the country. Under Donald Trump's presidency, the United States experienced one of the most intense periods of social and political polarization in its modern history. Families broke apart over ideological differences, friendships ended, churches divided. Dixon's warning about a leader who would split the nation in two no longer sounded symbolic. She also spoke of massive unrest, and in the year 2020 the United States experienced exactly that. Protests in the streets, racial tensions, cities burning, crowds confronting law enforcement. The country felt on the verge of something uncontrollable. Dixon's vision included images of chaos, disorder, and a storm over the nation, all of which seemed to be reflected in actual headlines. Perhaps the most unsettling connection came at the beginning of the year 2021. Dixon had spoken of a moment when truth and power would collide at the heart of government. On January 6, the United States Capitol, a symbol of American democracy, was invaded by protesters during the certification of the presidential election. No one believed such a scene was possible. Flags waving, broken windows, lawmakers hiding. The world watched in disbelief. But those who knew Dixon's prophecy saw something else, the moment she had warned about decades earlier. These events did not convince everyone that Dixon had been right, but for those who had always believed, they were confirmation that her vision was not imagination, but a glimpse of a future that had already become the present. Jeane Dixon's prophecy was not only about one man, but a warning about what would follow if that man came to power. Her message was clear. This leader would not only change policies or shake up politics, he would open a door to something much more dangerous, a deep fracture at the moral and spiritual core of the country. She warned that if that man came to power, the very fabric of the nation would begin to tear apart, not because of wars or financial collapses, but because of the way people would treat one another. Dixon spoke of a time when Americans would turn against each other, not because of crimes or injustices, but because of beliefs, a war of emotions, not weapons. She said that families would divide, that temples of faith would fall silent or fill with anger, and that truth would become unrecognizable. Good and evil will lose their meaning. She once wrote, "The people will no longer agree on what is real." Dixon also warned of an internal moral collapse. She did not speak of sudden destruction, but of a slow erosion in which power becomes more important than principle, where fear replaces faith and the nation enters into confusion without realizing it. She said that once that pattern began, it would be difficult to stop, like a river that changes its course and carries with it what was once solid ground. One of her most urgent messages was that this leader, however strong or inspiring he might appear, would be a test, not a political test, but a spiritual one. And if the people failed to see beyond the surface, the damage could last for generations. She did not say it to instill fear, but to awaken the nation before it was too late. Dixon described the result of this rise with vivid and disturbing language. She did not speak of invading armies or bombs, but of something more intimate and in many ways more terrifying, the inner collapse. She spoke of a wave of chaos that would spread across the earth not in a single day, but in layers. First, the breakdown of trust. People would stop believing in their leaders, in their institutions, and even in one another. She said this would happen when truth became more difficult to recognize than lies. In her vision, truth would not be silenced, but buried beneath the noise, distorted until no one could agree on what was real. Then she warned of conflict, not merely political disagreements, but deep hatred among citizens. They will not only oppose one another, she said, they will despise one another. She saw the media turned into a weapon, faith used as a shield or a sword, and leaders using fear to control rather than to serve. These were not random assumptions, they were warnings born from deep intuition, from a gaze that seemed to see beyond time. Jeane Dixon was not speaking about politics, but about the soul of a nation that, according to her, would lose its way when it forgot its spiritual foundation. Her message did not seek to instill fear, but to awaken awareness. She spoke of a division that would not be limited to ballot boxes or political parties, but would seep into homes, churches, and hearts. A fracture so deep that eyes would refuse to see and ears would stop listening. She said that this wound would not heal with a change of government, but with a change of spirit, and that only repentance, faith, and moral courage could reverse the course before it was too late. Among all her visions, there was one that remained almost silent, hidden in the margins of her diaries, carefully avoided by those who knew its weight. It was the vision of a false savior, a man who would reach the summit of power, surrounded by applause, blind faith, and crowds that would call him chosen. But Dixon saw beyond the brilliance. She described how a shadow would slowly begin to surround him. At first, disguised among successes and cheers, but growing silently until it consumed him. She saw betrayals, trials, isolation, and loneliness. "He will be alone," she wrote. "Those who raised him up will abandon him, and those who praised him will blame him." His downfall, she said, would not come through violence, but through consequence. The weight of his own decisions would become his ruin, and that ruin would not only shake his followers, but an entire country that would be plunged into doubt and confusion. How did we not see it? They would ask themselves. But the signs had always been there. Many believed that this part of the prophecy was kept hidden because of fear or because the world was not prepared to face it. However, today, as events seem to reflect her words, that forgotten warning resurfaces, calling for new reflection. Dixon never spoke of dates or names. Her visions were flashes, symbols that invited people to look beyond what was visible. She called that man the chosen disruptor and wrote that his rise would not be a reward for virtue, but the reflection of a people who had turned away from the truth. They will choose him, she said, not because of his purity, but because he projects what they carry inside. But she also warned, what rises without firm roots inevitably falls. She predicted that his end would be marked by humiliation, betrayal, and loneliness. He will believe he is at the top, she wrote, but the wind will change and those who shouted his name will turn against him. And his fall, slow and painful, would be more spiritual than political. A man surrounded by voices, but empty inside. His story would not remain as that of a victor, but as a warning of what happens when faith is replaced by ego and hope by idolatry. The deepest part of her prophecy was not the fall of one man, but the mirror she held up before an entire nation. Dixon believed that this leader represented collective pride and that his fall would reveal the price of that pride. The man will fall, she wrote, but the spirit he awakened may remain, and only a return to truth and to God will be able to silence it. Jeane Dixon passed away in 1997. She did not see what would come afterward, but her words seem to resonate with unsettling clarity in our present. Today many people are rereading her writings, not to search for predictions, but to find understanding, because her messages speak not only of politics or destiny, but of the soul and of purpose. Perhaps her greatest teaching is not in what she warned about, but in what she invites us to do now. To look inward, heal our divisions, reconnect with the truth, and remember that no leader, no figure can replace the voice of conscience or the light of the divine. If this message touched your heart, I invite you to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments what you think, what you feel, what reflection this story leaves you with. Thank you for staying with me until the end, and may God always bless you.